That's a clown question, bro.
Hi, what's up on you?
So I'm gonna kick some dirt.
He gets on base.
Just a bit outside.
I'm not the type of player that's going to be Johnny Hustle.
If you don't want me to watch the ball, you can go get it out of the ocean.
And welcome to the Show to Be Named Later special edition of the Show to Be Named Later. I am your host, Chris Gianta. Over there on the other side of the screen is the newly 20 years old Daniel Curran. How you doing, Daniel? How does it feel? I'm
a new man. I am starting a new decade of life, I guess. Yesterday, at the time we were recording this yesterday, which would have been Monday, I turned 20 years old. It really doesn't feel much different at this point, but I mean, I guess there is a new number on the first digit of my age. So I guess that is very different.
Yeah, I know that's
happened once every 10 years.
That's going to feel weird for me because 19, it's still like you feel like a bit of a kid, I guess, but 20 is just, I feel like that's going to be big for me.
By the end of this decade, I'm going to have to do everything on my own. It's tough.
Yeah. But, that's just how it is. Today, we are talking about a guy who made his major league debut at 20 years old.
They did.
Like a lot of the people on our list.
I'm nowhere close. What is this?
I mean, it's disappointing. Neither am I. Yeah, we're going to be talking about Ted Williams, who had a spectacular rookie year, of course, in 1939. This is part one of a two-part episode.
Yes.
We're going to start doing two parts now just because it makes more sense to kind of have each topic represented individually, but it's not separate episodes necessarily because, we still do it in one night and, we don't want to give the impression that we're doing really more episodes than we actually are. So yeah, we'll do.
We're recording once a week, posting twice a week.
Yes. So we're going to be doing Wednesdays and Fridays. And as of now, we are currently on Spotify. I had no idea how easy it was, but we're now on Spotify. And of course, we've always been on YouTube. But yeah, and as far as MLB news goes, today is the first day of hard negotiations between players.
Yeah.
And
do we want to talk about that a little? Because
maybe a little bit. I'm not very informed on the topic though.
I'll pull up some Jeff Passan tweets. Because he discussed, or no, I'm sorry, I think it was, Jesse Rogers from ESPN tweeted out a couple notes. About 65% of all players will make $1 million or less with what the MLB owners came up with. And the minimum would be $262K, which I know that, without, and there's actually some more too, but before I get into that, I know that sounds like, oh, it's 262K, that's still more than most people are making. Why is it such a problem? It's a problem because the billionaire owners are sort of coming off as a lot more greedy in this scenario. Here's some more notes. A player making 35 mil would actually make 7.8 mil, which is a huge difference. If you're Mike Trout, you're getting 7.8 mil a year. That's wrong, regardless of how much of a season you're playing. A player making 10 mil would get about 2.9 mil, and a player making 1 mil would get 434K.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely weird, and you kind of want the owners to, I guess, kind of take, especially in this time, kind of leave a little more money for the players. But I mean, the league minimum before this was $555,000 or something like that. And when you consider there's no ballpark revenue and there's probably going to be half a season, it makes sense a little bit. But I know that there's going to be a lot more negotiations there, and I feel like they'll meet in the middle somewhere. They should.
I sure hope so.
Yeah.
I am going to go insane if there's no baseball this year, but we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah. But yeah, that's basically it. I mean, it's the first day of negotiations, so there's probably a lot more on hand for the
Yeah.
next week. But now over to Ted Williams, Teddy Ball game. We'll
Yes.
start off
Mid splinter.
with how his life kind of started. And Ted Williams. Ted Williams grew up, born and raised in San Diego, California. Born in 1918, and he was kind of left alone a lot as a child. His mother dedicated to herself to humanitarian type stuff. Dedicated herself to the Salvation Army, but unfortunately for her two sons, they were kind of left alone a lot. Not saying that she was doing a bad job necessarily, but Ted Williams and his brother were left alone a lot. And also, his father was around, but he wasn't around very much. He was doing a lot of work outside of the house. So how Ted and his brother Danny would kind of blow off steam or whatever, or interact with other people, they would constantly play baseball at the local playground. There was no Little League at the time, but they had a local playground to hone their skills with, and they were able to make a pretty good baseball player out of Ted Williams. And eventually Ted Williams, I believe he was probably noticed in high school, and there was a Pacific Coast League team. It's a small professional league at the time. Now it's a AAA league, but it wasn't that at the time. And it was the Pacific Coast League team called the San Diego Padres, because there was no other San Diego Padres at the time. Baseball had not went westward yet. So the San Diego Padres noticed Ted Williams, and they picked him up at the age of 17. So Ted Williams was playing professional baseball at the age of 17, not making major league money, but still very impressive from Mr. Williams. And eventually he got spotted by a guy scouting him. It was Red Sox general manager Eddie Collins. Eddie Collins, also a Hall of Famer.
Highest position player award from anyone born in New York.
Correct. And 3,000 hit club. He might be like top 10 in hits or something like that.
Yeah,
and
he's very underrated for all time.
Yeah, that general manager noticed Ted Williams in 1937, and Williams was signed to the Red Sox. The Red Sox finally
how often do you
found
see a
some
Hall of Fame
talent.
player? How often do you see a Hall of Fame player turn into a Hall of Fame executive? I don't know exactly the full story of how Eddie Collins was as a GM, but I mean, you notice Ted Williams, you're not doing too bad for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty crazy. I can't imagine like Larry Walker just
Yeah.
scouting, or like even someone better like
George Brett.
George Brett.
Just turning around and making big moves, probably for the Royals.
Yeah, like, manager, I guess, Paul Molitor kind of translated. Yeah. But general manager, that's, pretty tall task, but I guess there wasn't really anybody else working there.
No one you really see very often. I don't know, are any Major League GMs former players that I can think of right now?
Not, to the level of Eddie Collins for sure.
Yeah, I can't think of anyone. I don't think there are any.
Yeah, I know in the NFL, John Lynch was a former safety, and he became
John
like
Elway
a GM,
too.
but that's football.
He's an owner.
Yeah, John Elway. So I
Elway.
guess it translates more in football.
Interesting though.
Yeah, very, very, very interesting. I guess that's how things worked in 1937, and it worked out for the Red Sox. Ted Williams, he reported to big league camp in 1938, and was a very brash, confident fellow, especially for a 19-year-old. He would just kind of, he was very, had his head very tall in the sky, and they determined he wasn't really major league ready at the time. As you know, he's a 19-year-old too. But with the Minneapolis Miners, which was the Red Sox minor league affiliate, he hit .366 with a .701 slugging percentage, and that kind of changed people's minds on whether he was
slugging.
big league ready or not.
And he sure was big league ready. He made his major league debut in 1939, and for that season he hit .327, .436, .609 for a .1045 OPS to start off his career. With a rookie record 145 RBIs. He also hit .351 with runners in scoring position that year. He pretty much did everything right at age 20. And his .1045 OPS in his rookie year wouldn't be undone until Aaron Judge in 2017, almost 80 years later, that stood. And he was third in WAR and OPS for that season, and would always appreciate the fans and tip his cap, like really man of the people, you know? And so that was the rookie season of Ted Williams. In 1940, after spending the offseason fishing in Minnesota, Harold Case, how do I pronounce that name?
Keza.
Harold Kaiser wrote, quote, "Can you imagine a nice kid with a nimble brain, not visiting his father and mother all of last winter? Hall of Fame fisherman as well." And this sort of started his negative attitude towards the media, and understandably so. Like, it's not something I'd want to hear about me, especially from someone who doesn't know me on that personal level. And the relationship with the media might have cost him a few awards here and there throughout his career. And he only hit 4 home runs through his first 41 games of 1940, which caused a lot of backlash from fans. And this sort of started another negative attitude, not towards the media, but towards fans. And he stopped tipping his cap after because they doubted him when he went through a slump. And he finished with a league-leading .442 OBP despite the tough start. And he finished third in WAR and OPS. He had a .1036.
And those first 2 years are definitely a big foreshadowing for Mr. Williams. So that leads into his 1941, where he goes into 11th gear. He starts going crazy with the bat. We'll fast forward to the All-Star game. And, you know, Ted Williams, despite being an absolute superstar that year, he was in the shadow of a counterpart in New York, Joe DiMaggio. Joe DiMaggio was in the midst of his famous hit streak. He was 48 games into that hit streak, which might have been a record at the time. I didn't check, but
has to be.
He was on his way to the record. And you know, Ted Williams wasn't getting the attention that he deserved. And it leads to the score being 5-3, National League winning in the bottom of the ninth. And then Joe DiMaggio came up to the plate. And you think, you know, Joe DiMaggio, he's the star. Jesus. Not an ad that time from Major League Baseball. So you think Joe DiMaggio, he's the star of the league. He should be able to drive these runners in. He drives one in, and, you know, it's bases loaded, one out, and luckily only one man was out in that at bat. It was a force out, and it scored one run. So then Ted Williams comes up to the plate. It's 5-4 National League, and there's 5-4 National League with Ted Williams up to the plate. Ted Williams is up to the plate with first and third and 2 outs. High pressure situation. And also you have to consider, like, 1941, the All-Star game was being taken very seriously because, you know, outside of the World Series, this was the only time where the American League stars and the National League stars were going against each other. And, you know, things were.
And it was really the first time they were on a national stage, too.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. So Ted Williams comes up to the plate with men on first and third, 2 outs, pressure pack situation. So Ted Williams steals the show in the 1941 All-Star Game and sets up the rest of that season for him.
Random side note: can we bring back dressing like that to baseball games?
What, just suits and hats?
Yeah, just for baseball games strictly though.
Only baseball games?
Yeah.
That would, especially like
Just for like
July.
one day. I want a team to do that. Just be like dressed like the 40s.
Yeah, if that's happening, that's got to happen in like April. I'm not going to be able to sit.
Oh, no, not in a summer game. No.
Yeah, no way. But I think as a
Or even
theme,
like a team with a dome, just like put the AC on.
yeah, possibly like
The Rays.
do a promotional thing. You wear like a suit and like the girls wear whatever, I don't know what the formal wear, and then like they give away like hats or whatever, like top
Exactly,
hats.
like the straw hats like that. Yeah,
Yeah. I think that would work.
I think that'd be great.
That would be a good promo night for
Just one day. Just do
just
it.
one day.
Yeah.
Screw it. Yeah. Go ahead. So Ted Williams, he's skipping around the bases, and he steals the show in that 1941 All-Star Game. Steals the spotlight right from Joe DiMaggio. Joe DiMaggio's streak ends July 16th, which was like a little over a week after that All-Star Game. But what if I told you that Ted Williams actually was better than Joe DiMaggio during Joe DiMaggio's famous hit streak? Joe DiMaggio, during his hit streak, he hit 408 with an 1181 OPS.
Unprecedented.
Very good. Very good. Who can top that? Ted Williams can top that. He had a 412 average with a 1224 OPS. He had a 4-point average higher than Joe DiMaggio during the 56-game hit streak that Joe DiMaggio had. It's wild, crazy. So then we fast forward to July 25th, where Ted Williams goes 2 for 3 with a home run against the Cleveland Indians, and that upped his average to 400. And that average would never dip below 400 again during that season. From that game moving forward, he hit 417 with a 594 on base percentage and a 1398 on base percentage. And then heading into the last day of the season, he's ready to play a doubleheader. His average, this is a famous story. His average is 399.6. So it would round up to 400 because we use, 3 digits when we're talking about average. And, the manager at the time, Joe Cronin, said he would actually let Ted Williams sit the last day, if he wanted to, and if he wanted to maintain that 400 batting average. And in classic Ted Williams fashion, Ted Williams decides he's going to play the doubleheader, both games 1 and 2. And of course, he goes 6 for 8 with a home run and a double in that series, ending the season with a 406 batting average. Of course, no one has hit 400 since. Ted Williams hits 406. No one's reached 400 ever since then. And it's not even like Ted Williams, it wasn't like he was a singles hitter. It wasn't like he was not getting extra base hits too. And it's not like he was not walking either. He had a league-leading 553 on base percentage. Also, 735 slugging percentage, a 1287 OPS, a 10.4 baseball reference WAR, 11 Fangraphs WAR, 147 walks, 135 runs, and 37 home runs.
Not bad. Not bad.
Yeah. And if you thought, that 553 on base percentage, that's crazy. Is that like a record or something? At the time, that was a single season record. That 553 on base percentage was a single season record at the time. And it would take Barry Bonds in 2002 to break that record, who else is going to break that record? Barry Bonds in 2002 during that 4-year stretch.
Can't say I'm surprised at all. Like that was the most unreal 4-year stretch probably in the history of sports.
Correct. Yeah, and it took 61 years to break that on-base percentage record, and I don't think 609 is ever going to be broken. Just my opinion.
Nope.
It's pretty much impossible.
Barry Bonds broke it multiple times too.
Yeah. And back to the 1941 season, only two men have had a better single-season OPS than Williams did in 1941, and those two men were Babe Ruth and Barry Bonds again. But
no shame in losing to those guys.
In the midst of only two men having a higher OPS, having the all-time single-season record for on-base percentage, loses the Most Valuable Player award to Joe DiMaggio, who was on the winning team, and he had that famous hit streak, and I guess that's how the writers thought back then.
Yeah.
I guess that's
that vote goes differently in 2020.
Yeah, for sure. Ted Williams gets that nod unanimously in today's day.
Yeah.
But then in 1942, well, actually, story probably starts December 1941. Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor, and obviously the U.S. wants their youngest, strongest, most athletic men to fight the Japanese and also fight the Germans, the whole Axis party, and they want their baseball players, a ton of guys, Joe DiMaggio, Hank Greenberg, among many others. Baseball kind of died between 43 and 45, but Ted Williams, he was asked to do service like in 1942, and he didn't want to go into service at 1942, and he made a deal with the U.S. Navy that after that 1942 season, he would join them and he would fight out the rest of the war. And in that 1942 season, he wins the Triple Crown. He hit .356 with 36 home runs and 137 RBI. To go along with that, he leads in the most important stats as well. Leads in on-base percentage at .499, slugging percentage at .648, OPS at 1147, walks with 145, runs with 141, Baseball Reference WAR with 10.4, and Fangraphs WAR with 11.6. And again, he loses the MVP to a Yankee, not Joe DiMaggio this time, but instead a Yankee, Joe Gordon, because I guess one player can lead a team, and I guess Ted Williams did not lead his team well enough. Didn't have to do anything.
Mike Trout would be terrible if it was looked at like this.
Mike Trout would have one MVP. It would be in 2014,
which is still like statistically his worst season, which is even funnier.
Which is hilarious. That's correct. So yeah, Ted Williams loses the MVP after winning the Triple Crown, and obviously I think the writers kind of had a gripe against him as well, so that didn't help him either. And obviously that ends his baseball career for the moment. Puts the baseball career on pause for a little bit. And in those first 4 years of his career, 1939 to 1942, he slashed .356, .481, .642 for an 1123 OPS, also averaged 32 home runs and 124 walks per year. And of all players in baseball history, all of baseball history, all 150 years of it, he holds the record for most walks, highest on-base percentage, highest slugging percentage, highest OPS, and highest wins above replacement in the first 4 seasons. Ted Williams got out of the gates hot. So then he goes into the Navy.
Major League history.
What was that?
Literally the best start in Major League history.
Literally. And all facets of the game, or all combined facets of the game, best start in baseball history. So he goes into the Navy, and he was trained to be a pilot, and he became so good, so well educated in the topic that, he was made an instructor. Actually, he was instructing people that went off to war, and that's basically how he served World War II. He didn't see combat, but he trained the pilots that were going into combat. And, after 1945, what a relief for him. He gets to go back and play baseball. And what does he do when he comes back in 1946?
So allegedly, he hits a ball on June 9th, 1946, that goes 502 feet into right field at Fenway. If you go to Fenway today, there is a red seat among a sea of green that marks where that ball landed. There's a lot of conspiracies out there over whether this happened or not. Chris, what is your stance on that?
I feel like I think the theory that I would go with, or that seems most believable, and I guess I didn't research enough on it, home plate might have been further up a little bit, but I feel like he still hit it 502 feet.
He definitely still hit it. Yeah, I would buy that because that's like reasonable.
But
And not
that
only
red sea is insane.
like David Ortiz would go out there with a metal bat and like not even sniff it.
Yeah.
I went on a tour of Fenway a few years ago, and our tour guide talked about the red seat, and he got deep into the details of like the fan that was sitting in that seat at the time. And apparently he was from Albany, New York, which is my hometown. So I would like to believe that it happened.
Yeah. And
So, 518 represent. On July 14th of that same season, the Indians put their second baseman in short right field, their shortstop at second, and their third baseman at the shortstop position to create the Ted Williams shift, where everyone goes to the right side of the field essentially as much as possible. And
that is why Mitch Moreland never gets any base hits.
Sad. Yep. And he would actually get criticized for not attempting to hit it to left field. However, despite all this, he still leads the league that season in OBP with a 497, a 667 slugging, an 1164 OPS, 10.6 baseball reference score, and an 11.8 Fangraph score. And he finally wins his first MVP that season. The Red Sox were obviously very good. They went 104-50, and they played exhibition games against a group of AL players while waiting for the NL to be decided in their 3-game playoff. During this series of exhibition games, Ted got hit on the elbow by a pitch, and it may have affected him in the World Series because in that World Series, he hit 200 with a 533 OPS, and he went 1 for 6 with runners in scoring position. Not very good, and the team lost in 7 games. So, that 1946 World Series with, I believe, the Cardinals could have gone a lot differently.
Yeah.
And in 1947, the next season, he wins his second Triple Crown, hitting 343, driving in 114 runs, and hitting 32 bombs. And he was the only American League player to win multiple Triple Crowns at the time. Does that still stand?
Yeah, that still stands.
Of course it is.
He's one of 2 players ever to do it ever. Rogers Hornsby did it in the National League.
Nice. And he led the AL in OBP that season with a 499, slugging with a 634, OPS with an 1133, walks with 162. That's 1 for every game in the season. Not at that time, but at this time. 125 runs. And he also led both wins above replacement sites. He loses the MVP, unfortunately, to Joe DiMaggio once again, in possibly the most absurd MVP decision ever. Obviously, it was looked at differently back then, but it still raises an eyebrow. DiMaggio had less than half the WAR that Ted Williams had. He was tied for 6th in Baseball Reference WAR and 12th in F-WAR, but of course he was on the team that won the pennant, so by default, he wins the MVP. In 1948, he leads every slash line category. What else is new? He finishes 2nd in WAR and 3rd in the MVP vote, and the team loses game 155, which is essentially game 163. It's a playoff tiebreaker to the Indians. They lost it 8-3. The Indians, of course, went on to win the most recent World Series title in their history after that. And in 1949, he has a record 84-game on-base streak. That is well over half the season consecutively he got on base. He led the league in OBP, slugging, OPS, WAR, FWAR, because of course he did. And the team lost the last 2 games in New York, resulting in losing the pennant. And he won his second MVP that season. And then he starts to get a little quieter at the turn of the decade. In 1950, he's having another great year, but then he shatters his elbow once again, going for a fly ball at Yankee Stadium, and he only played 85 games. But minimum 400 plate appearances, he still did what he could, led in slugging and OPS. So injury-riddled 1950 turns to 1951, his 10th year. He has a career low in slugging and OPS, but he still leads the league, of course. Well, because why not? Why would he not?
Yeah.
Literally the worst year of his career, and he still leads the league because that's what Ted Williams does. He leads the AL in WAR, and he finishes 13th in the MVP vote. But of all the players in baseball history, he has the most walks, highest WP, and highest WAR in the first 10 seasons of a career.
Yes. I think my favorite stat of Ted Williams is in his 10th year, his career low slugging and OPS led the league.
Led the league, yeah.
That's the most hilarious thing that I've probably found ever. And yeah, highest WAR, highest wins above replacement in the first 10 seasons of a career. I found that out from researching Albert Pujols, who was number 2 on that list. So then in 1952, the Korean War is heating up, and Ted Williams was in the reserves at the time. I think it got him some extra money, but the country was in need of pilots, and Ted Williams obviously was very educated with his knowledge of flying, and Williams was actually sent into active duty. So unlike World War II, he is in combat now, which is something you definitely have to worry about if you're the Boston Red Sox. So, of course, before that, Ted Williams played 6 games total, and in Williams's 6th and final game of 1952, he hit a go-ahead home run in his last at-bat, and that helped the Red Sox win 5-3. So a hero's exit at the time.
Just real quick, one more. Let me get one more in before I go off to fight for our country.
Yeah. Let's end on a good one. End on a good one. So he flew on 39 combat missions in Korea, and I don't really have much of a scale that I know with like combat missions, but 39 combat missions seems like a lot every time you're taking a risk of dying. And actually, there's a cool story on a PBS documentary, American Masters, that shared pretty much exactly what happened with Ted Williams on his 3rd mission. We almost didn't get to see the last 7 years of his career because of what happened on this mission. So I'll let did I do something wrong? I will let PBS American Masters tell the story.
Combat. He flew scores of missions and had this one harrowing experience.
I got down too low and I got hit with small ground fire and I started a little fire going.
The plane was on fire. I mean, you cannot imagine a more dangerous situation. If you were going to follow the strict protocol, he should have bailed out.
But he didn't want to do that.
He was afraid that if he ejected, he would cap his knees and never be able to play again. So he determined that he was going to land this thing.
But he was heading the wrong way.
Luckily, one of the guys on the mission flew up right alongside him, could tell that he was out of radio, and so they were doing hand signals.
Without him, I'm not so sure I'd have got back into K-13 or 14 where the hell I landed.
And making it even worse, the landing gear was stuck. The wheels wouldn't come down.
I was scared. Certainly I was scared, and I was mad. If I get scared, I'm mad.
He gets mad, and he looks to the sky.
I said, oh, for the goddamn Christ, it's the time old Teddy Ballgame needs you.
If you're up there, now would be a good time to help me.
I don't think I had 10 seconds more in the air before things flew apart.
And he skids and fires coming out.
Skidded to a stop finally at the very end of the runway. Jumped out of the plane and the thing burst into flames. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, that was a great documentary that I saw. I had to rent it for a few bucks, but it's well worth your time if you're at home.
I saw it when it first came out.
Yeah, I did not, but yeah, it's a very good documentary. Kind of shapes his life in a very good way. Gives you a good idea of who he was as a person. But back to his 1953, back to his war run in Korea. After he came back to the U.S., came back a little early because the war was pretty much over, and I think they like honorarily discharged him a little bit early. And there's a legendary story of what he was able to do in his first batting practice. Legend has it that he hit 13 home runs in a row in his first batting practice back from Korea.
Months prior, he literally almost died and may have had to get like his legs amputated or his arms or something like that. Now here he is hitting 13 in a row at Fenway.
Yeah, and I really would like to believe this story because just like hitting was just
it seems legit. Like it definitely seems believable.
Yeah, and I say hitting was in his blood, but also one thing, just kind of a side note, he hated when people said he was a natural because he thought it would offend his hard work. So I hope I didn't upset Ted Williams a little there. But back to 1953, where he is actually able to have a quarter of a season in 1953. After coming back from war, he hit 407 with a 1410 OPS in 37 games in 1953. And I know that this stat is minimum 100 plate appearances, and I guess that's a small sample size.
Very small.
But for anyone to finish a season with at least 100 plate appearances, he is the all-time leader in slugging percentage with 901.
901. An OPS of 901 after coming back from war would have been insane. We're talking slugging percentage here.
Yeah, we're taking the on-base percentage out of this equation. Just the slugging percentage. It was crazy. And of all seasons where a player ended up with 150 plate appearances or less, his 13 home runs are the most ever. And he only had 110 plate appearances.
Joke.
And, it's not like I looked at guys' like first 110 plate appearances. I know there's probably more home runs in the first 110 plate appearances, but in the last, in seasons where there was less than 150, his 13 home runs are the most.
That's right. And in 54 through 56, he had to get through injury as well as some controversy, but he was still the old Ted Williams. He broke his collarbone in a spring training game and didn't start the regular season until May 15th. This was in 1954, and yet he still led the league in OBP with a 513, slugging with a 635, and OPS with an 1148. He finished second in B-WAR and led in F-WAR, even though he missed 45 games. And he also set the record for walk rate. 25.9% of his plate appearances he walked, 1 in every 4. And only one man has topped it since. Is there any information on who that is?
I think it was this Giants player in like the early 2000s.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Jeff Kemp. All right. Led in OBP, slugging, OPS, and FWAR in the seasons following World War II and the Korean War. And he led in OBP, slugging, and OPS in 8 consecutive years when qualified. Insane. And in 55, he had to take a bit of a step back for personal reasons. He quote-unquote retired as a strategic move for divorce. And he didn't want to pay a large amount of his alimony. So not making money would, of course, reduce that. And he started the season on May 28th. and a minimum 400 plate appearances. He led in all slash categories. Just for reference, his slash line was 356, 496, 703, flat 1200 OPS. And a 1200 OPS was the highest in the league since 1941. And I'm pretty sure Ted Williams did that season as well. And in 1956, not too much to document, but he led the league in OBP, of course, with a 479, and his 1084 OPS ranked second.
So yeah, his, basically the trajectory of his career, I guess it's slowing down a bit. I guess when you're not leading in OPS and, you only have a 479 on base percentage. Maybe things are slowing down. Maybe time to retire is soon for Ted Williams. But he flips the script in 1957. I mean, one of the historic age 38 and 39 seasons. Crazy. So in 1957, he led the league in all slash line categories, had a 388 average, a 526 on base percentage, a 731 slugging percentage, and a 1257 OPS. That was his best OPS since his 1941 season, and might have been the best in all of baseball since that 1941 season. And that 388 batting average is the best ever for a player in his age 38 season or older. Best ever. And his OPS ranks second for age. His OPS ranks second for players in age 38 seasons or better. And, the fall off after him is pretty major. So for everyone in their age 38 seasons, OPS ranked is Barry Bonds in 2004 with 1422, Barry Bonds in 2003 with 1278, Ted Williams in 1957 with 1257, and then the next best is almost 200 points lower at 1066. So there's a major fall off after Ted Williams
and Barry Bonds
for that age 38 season. And then in 1958, he's still raking, leads the league in average, leads the league in on-base percentage, and leads the league in OPS. And his OPS that year was the second highest OPS for a player in their age 39 season or higher. And, obviously Barry Bonds in 2004 takes the cake. But at the time, it was the best for a player in their age 39 season or better.
Mm-hmm.
So then in 1959, he kind of takes a step back, as one usually does in their later years. Unlike his age 38 and 39 years, his age 40 season kind of had some turmoil there. He had a pinched nerve in his neck, and sometimes he had to wear an actual neck brace, kind of a sign of his mortality at the time. He started in 75 games. He played in 103 because I think he pinch hit in a lot of games. He was coming off the bench in a lot of those games in 1959. And, he had a 372 on base percentage and a 791 OPS in 331 plate appearances. So this was clearly not the same Ted Williams we were used to seeing. But
still getting on base, though. He's still getting those walks in.
Yes, as Peter Brand would say, he gets on base. He gets on base. Yeah, but, something that occurred off the field that was very important to, one person in particular, the Red Sox had their first African-American player ever. I think they might have been the last franchise to do it, which tough, but
not a good look.
But, Ted Williams was very embracing to this player. The player's name was Pumpsy Green, and they actually became throwing partners. Ted Williams, a 40-year-old, taking the veteran role and also, a very civil role, very socially progressive role.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's huge because this is, 1959. It's during the very middle of the civil rights movement. And to have an icon like Ted Williams really going out of his way and showing his support like that, I think that's a really big step forward for a team that needed it and for a city that needed it.
Yeah, and his ideas kind of progressed forward as it led into his post-career. But in 1960, this was his final season. He was actually offered the same amount of money that he was earning in 1959, but he actually refused to take it. Imagine that, a player refusing to take money. I don't know if there was a players association back then. Maybe they were a little upset, but he actually took a 30% pay cut for that 1960 season.
Hilarious.
Because, he thought he should be getting what he earned based on the previous season. And
he would be rolling in his grave right now at the Players Association today.
Yeah, I guess for better or for worse, but I guess that is the truth.
Mm-hmm.
But Ted Williams, on June 17th of his final season in 1960, he actually became the third member of the 500 home run club. No footage of that to be seen. That's like the first time that's happened for us. We're actually I couldn't find Willie Mays' 500th home run, but his 600th was available. So
there we go.
But nothing for Ted Williams there. But also, Ted Williams as a whole in that season was back to his spectacular self. He wasn't, in that 1959, mentality or 1959, physical ability. Didn't have any ailments, and he didn't play in as many games. He still had, I believe, less than 400 plate appearances, but minimum 350 plate appearances. He led the league in on-base percentage, slugging, and OPS. Had a 451 on base, a 645 slugging percentage, and a 1096 OPS to close that season out. And also minimum 350 plate appearances. He has the highest on-base percentage, slugging percentage, and OPS of a player in his age 40 season or older. Most or best all time. And then that leads to his legendary last at bat. There's no raw footage of it that was put up on
broadcasted.
Yeah, that was broadcasted. But there is footage, and there's going to be talking over it. But it is from very knowledgeable people in on that PBS American Masters documentary series. So here's basically the storyline of Ted Williams' last at bat of his career.
September 28, 1960, the last day at Fenway Park.
A Wednesday afternoon, otherwise meaningless game. And Jack Fisher was the pitcher for the Baltimore Orioles.
That day, going to the ballpark, it was cold, dreary. It was not a good day for baseball.
Ted walks in one of his at-bats, and he hits two very long fly balls, but the ball wasn't carrying well that day.
They were caught out there by the fence, and I hit them both good. It was a dull, damp day in Boston.
The wind was really blowing in from right field, so I really didn't think that against that wind, he had a chance to hit it out.
It's the eighth inning, and he knew this was his last time at the plate.
People realized they were suddenly seeing Ted Williams for the last time as a player.
It was not that big a crowd that day, only about 10,000, but they were all standing, and you knew what they wanted. And can you deliver in that situation? How hard is that to do?
The first pitch was a ball. The second pitch was a fastball, and it was pretty much right down the middle of the plate, and he swung and missed it.
I missed it, and I, to this day, don't know how I missed that ball.
And he said, I can see it going through his mind. The old man can't get around on the fastball. So sure as I'm standing here, I know that fastball's coming again.
I knew I was going to get another one because he couldn't wait to say, well, I'll throw this one by him.
Fisher throws the ball. And if there was ever going to be a time when he would go back on his pledge of not wanting to tip his cap, that would have been it. And he said later that as he rounded second, the thought crossed his mind.
I thought about it, but just something I couldn't quite do.
He just kept the head down and kept churning and went right into the dugout.
Of course, people are still cheering and asking for a curtain call and this, that, and the other. And so I kind of fumbled around on the mound, went back, grabbed the rosin bag, took my time, giving him a chance.
And the umpires and his teammates and the manager, Mike Higgins, waving him out. Ted, come out.
I look in the dugout there, and he waved to me, go ahead and pitch. I'm not going back out.
I'm gone. Goodbye. Over.
That, of course, coming from American Masters, a PBS documentary series. Very good, of course. And yeah, legend status. Last at bat of his career, hits a bomb, hits a homer, against the conditions. Crazy.
Yeah. So post-career, of course, he is inducted into the Hall of Fame. In 1966, he gets 93.4% of the vote. That may seem low, but obviously he was not on good terms with a lot of the media, the baseball writers, and that is believed to be a reason why a lot of them didn't vote. And in 1968, he wrote The Science of Hitting, a book which is still to this day referenced. And in his Hall of Fame speech, he said, quote, "I hope that someday the names of Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson in some way could be added as a symbol of great Negro League players that are not here only because they were not given a chance." So obviously Ted advocate once again, like this is a little past the civil rights movement, but he was advocating for these Negro Leaguers. You've probably heard of Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson before. Of course, Satchel Paige, I believe, actually did get to pitch in the majors, if I'm not mistaken. Gibson did not, unfortunately, but his numbers are ridiculous if you can look at them. And Paige and Gibson would get in 1971 and 72, respectively, to the Hall of Fame. And Ted Williams managed the Washington Senators / the Texas Rangers from 1969 to 72. And it didn't work out, unfortunately. And in 1970, he said his most famous quote ever, quote, "A man has to have goals for a day, for a lifetime." And that was mine. To have people say, "There goes Ted Williams, the greatest hitter who ever lived." And he started to become more friendly with the fans and the media, sort of changed his character around. And he became the first Red Sox player to have his number retired. That happened in 1984. And he later on started to help his son with a memorabilia company. And in 1991, celebrating the 50th anniversary of his 1941 season, he did it. He did the unthinkable. He tipped his cap to the crowd at Fenway Park. A few years later, in 1999, the MLB is hosting the All-Star Game at Fenway Park, and they're doing the All-Century team. And one of the most iconic and legendary moments of baseball history happened pre-game.
Ladies and gentlemen, he wore the Red Sox uniform for 22 years. He wore the uniform of the United States Marines for 4.5 more. He owned left field at this very ballpark. He was the last man to hit 400 in a season, and he did it 58 years ago. He hit 521 home runs, including one on his last at-bat. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the greatest hitter that ever lived,
don't get chills watching the video, then you're not a baseball fan or not human.
Yeah, I mean it's spectacular to see the amount of respect that was shown. I ran the video a bit long. I might edit a chunk of it a bit later, but I had to get everyone crowding around him once he finally made that loop to just show, especially from like position players, Ted Williams in terms of career-wise, top 2.
Even like Randy Johnson in there too. Like they showed some pictures. Tom Seaver I saw in there.
I mean, yeah, he's just such an influence on the game of baseball, and there was so much respect shown for him.
It's interesting because you don't really hear from him that often. He didn't really put himself out there nationally at really any point. And that was kind of the most public thing he ever really did outside of playing baseball.
Yeah.
So a few years later, on July 5th, 2002, Ted Williams passes away at the age of 83. And he agreed to be frozen after his death for the possibility of coming back to see his children.
Yeah. And, that's part of the legacy. He's he's frozen now, and maybe he can come back, see everybody, see how the world has changed in the past 18 years.
Now would not be a very good time to do that, though.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Definitely, especially talk about at risk.
Mm-hmm.
Very at risk.
Yeah.
But ultimately, his legacy is for how great of a player, how great, especially of a hitter he was. He leads the Red Sox all time in wins above replacement, offensive wins above replacement, average on base percentage, slugging percentage, OPS, home runs, and walks. And all time among the entire league, his 521 home runs ranks 20th all time. His 1,839 RBI ranks 15th all time, and his 2,021 walks ranks 4th all time. And this is a guy who had less than 10,000 plate appearances, and he ranks 4th all time in walks. His baseball reference WAR ranks 11th all time among position players, and his Fangraphs WAR ranks 8th. His offensive WAR ranks 6th all time. That's kind of the baseball reference measurement for offensive production, and then Fangraphs measurement of offensive production is offensive runs above average. In that statistic, he ranks 3rd all time, right behind Babe Ruth and Barry Bonds. And also, you have to consider his rate statistics. He didn't have as full of a career as, Ruth, Bonds, and a bunch of other guys. His 1116 OPS ranks 2nd all time among all qualifiers. That's like minimum
unreal
plate appearance.
Unreal.
Then his 634 slugging percentage also ranks 2nd. His 190 OPS plus also ranks 2nd, and his 187 weighted runs created plus ranks 2nd as well. But where he ranks the best is on-base percentage. His 482 career on-base percentage is the best all-time among all players with, I believe, 5,000 career plate appearances, ranks 1st all time. And then where he also ranks most all time, his career walk rate, which is 20.6%, that is also the most, or the highest walk rate of all time. And he, in terms of what he was able to do in single seasons and how he was able to carry that over, he led the league in OPS 10 times. That's tied for the 3rd most amount of times anyone has ever done that in baseball history. He also led the league in slugging 9 times. That is tied for the 2nd most amount of times anyone's done that in baseball history. And after his rookie year, he didn't lead in 1939, his rookie year. He didn't lead in any of the slash line categories. And then after that rookie year, there were 12 seasons where he qualified to lead in on-base percentage, slugging percentage, and OPS. I think the plate appearance minimum is like 502 or something like that.
Mhm.
And in those 12 seasons, in all 12 of those seasons, he led an on-base percentage every single time.
He was
This guy
undefeated.
could not stop getting on base, whether it was a home run or whether it was a walk. He just got on base like literally no one else was able to do. And the amount of times he led the league in on-base percentage, obviously 12 times, and that is the most amount of times anyone has done that in baseball history. And this is a guy who qualified a total of 13 times. A lot more guys have qualified more times.
Mhm.
So, Ted Williams, last week we did Mickey Mantle, and we talked about, Mickey Mantle is, a Hall of Famer that still has like a what could have been factor, what was his potential. Ted Williams is probably the ultimate example of that, though, because, 5 years of his career were interrupted by wars, the World War II and the Korean War. Most careers, that go throughout the 40s, it's mostly like one war. I don't know if any baseball player besides Ted Williams went to both wars, but he did. And, he faced the consequences of it. He missed his age 24, 25, and 26 seasons due to World War II. And he missed most of his age 33 and age 34 seasons due to the Korean War. So what I did, I took out the 1952 and 1953 seasons, and I added his 162 game pace to, the 5 seasons that were missing, 1943, 1944, and 1945, 1952, and 1953. You take out all the numbers from 52 and 53, and then you put a 162 game pace on all 5 of those seasons. So if that happened, which, it likely probably would have happened because he never really
You know what? It could even have been more because like age 24 to 26, that's his prime. Like that's the best years of his career he could have lost due to the war.
Coming straight off a triple crown as well.
Like you could have had 3 of the best seasons in that time above his average.
Who knows what his potential was? But if you take out those and add the 162 game pace to those 5 seasons, his total number of hits would be 3,553, which would be 5th all time. His career home runs would be 692, which would also be 5th all time. And at the time, that would have been 2nd all time. And maybe he would have stayed an extra season and tried to break that Babe Ruth record. He would have had 2,452 RBI, and that would be most all time. Also, his 2,414 runs scored in this world with no wars. Those 2,414 runs scored would also be most all time. And his 2,715 potential walks would also be most all time. We would be talking about top 3 player of all time, most likely. And in fact, if this pace goes on with his baseball reference wars as well, his 161.9 potential baseball reference war would be 3rd all time among position players. And Fangraphs war was more nice to him. His 176.5 Fangraphs war would be the most all time among position players. According to Fangraphs, he would literally be the best player of all time. So you have to think of what these wars kind of meant to his career. It's it's tough, but that's how it was back then. You had to serve in those particular wars, and you can only think about what would have happened if there were no wars. If we lived in a peaceful society, what would happen with Ted Williams's numbers? But the legacy of Ted Williams, ultimately, he was described in documentaries as like the real life John Wayne. He went to the Korean War. He almost died on his 3rd combat mission, his 3rd out of 39 combat missions. And the Americans kind of turned out well in that war, helped them out a little bit, and he was a great fighter pilot. And to add to his fighter pilot abilities, he was a Hall of Fame, and this was mostly post-career, but he was a Hall of Fame fly fisherman, which I think Daniel mentioned earlier in the show. A Hall of Fame fly fisherman. The guy loved to fish, and apparently he was spectacular at it. And, when you add on top of that, obviously he's the best hitter of his generation for sure. I would say, career-wise, top 2 of all time, if you just ignore the eras and just each era against each other, Ted Williams is probably top 2 right behind Babe Ruth in terms of what they were able to do in their career. And also you have to consider, Ted Williams, he was a Boston Red Sox player, only made it to the World Series once, and that was hard to do in a 19-year career, especially when there's only 8 teams in the league. So he was on a struggling Red Sox team, and he was the perfect counter to Joe DiMaggio. Joe DiMaggio kind of had all the glory of being, like a 9-time World Series champion. I'm not sure how many World Series championships he had, but he won a lot of championships. He was always in the playoffs. He was always in the national spotlight, and he got all the glory. He won 2 MVPs that Ted Williams actually should have won in 1941 and 1947. And, DiMaggio would kind of tease Ted Williams, for lack of team success, even though, Williams was doing more for his team than Joe DiMaggio was doing for his team, for sure. It's kind of a silly argument, if you ask me. And, the perfect example of, DiMaggio kind of getting the glory, he was still a spectacular player, still no doubt Hall of Famer, but he got all the glory that Williams didn't really get at the time. So DiMaggio, he gets all the love for his hit streak, that 56-game hit streak. But we all know, with it's modern baseball, getting on base is ultimately what you should be trying to do instead of getting on base via hit. Get on base however you can. And, Ted Williams' 84-game on-base streak hardly gets recognized. I mean, I found out about it like a couple of weeks ago. I was looking at Albert Pujols' on-base streak to see where it stood amongst the rest. And then I see Ted Williams has an 84-game on-base streak. That's crazy. And it's crazy that no one really knew about it. And, not a lot of people still know about it. I'm sure a lot of people who are perhaps listening just learned about it today. And, that on-base streak doesn't really get recognized. So I think that's the perfect example of him versus DiMaggio. And, Williams was also important, just as a person. You look at how he was able to progress things, in civil rights, at least within the baseball world, his relationship with the first Red Sox African-American player, Pumpsie Green, being his throwing partner, kind of welcoming him into baseball and welcoming more African-Americans into the Red Sox organization and the rest of baseball, and how he was able to make sure that Negro League players were getting the recognition that they deserved. I mean, they created, after his speech, they created like basically the Negro League Veterans Committee, sort of, in a way. They created a new committee to vote in Negro League players, and that's how, Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige were able to get in. And ultimately, his legacy is kind of just a pure hitter. He wasn't the best defender in the world. He was probably a replacement defender, but he was an absolute scientist of hitting. He boiled it down into an art form. And
he could have taught hitting at like MIT.
Yeah, he had a PhD in hitting baseballs. I mean, he's one person that I would have liked to see, like, how he would translate today. Like, if he had, a weight room, if he had slow motion video. I mean, I can't imagine what
he had StatCast.
Yeah, StatCast. I can't imagine what he would be able to do.
Ted Williams was probably on launch angle before anyone else.
Yeah, probably. And, he continues to influence even current players. I know Joey Votto in that
Yep.
in that documentary was praising Ted Williams and the science of hitting, which was written like I think it was exactly 50 years prior to that documentary, where he has the 77 baseball strike zone. And Wade Boggs, in fact, another Red Sox player, Wade Boggs read The Science of Hitting his senior year, and he broke out of a slump because of it. It taught him patience and discipline, and picking the right pitch and being able to utilize pitchers' strengths and weaknesses. And yeah, he was a scientist of hitting. He continues to influence people in the game today. His swing was a work of art. He worked on his swing constantly. He would, his warm up would be like looking at a floor length mirror and just kind of looking at himself in the mirror and practicing his swing. And like when I was watching the documentaries and stuff, it made me want to pick up a bat. I'm not even a huge hitter. I'm more of a pitching type, but he made me want to, test out my swing. I haven't swung a bat in forever. But yeah, that's my take on Ted Williams.
So I have a couple bonus stories. I don't know the exact story, but I believe when Mike Piazza was like a teenager, he met Ted Williams somehow, and Ted Williams like gave him batting lessons that helped him become the Mike Piazza that we know today. And he was, of course, at that All-Star game. And yeah, so that was obviously, another example of how he influences more modern players. But my initial take, I don't remember where I heard this, but sometime over the last week, I heard someone that said, like, you can only be great at one thing. Not if you're Ted Williams. You can be great at 3 different things. You could be great at hitting, you could be a great fighter pilot, and you could be a great fisherman. He did all those at essentially as high a level as possible. And he was fantastic at all 3 of them.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. And that is where we close the book on Ted Williams.
The greatest hitter who ever lived.
The greatest hitter who ever lived. That's how he wants to be recognized. I totally understand that. Put in all that work, and that closes the book on Ted Williams. That ends part 1 of episode 38 of the show to be named later on Friday, or if you're listening past Friday the 29th, if you're listening past that, we'll have a 1995 Mariners episode. This is the team. This is going to be possibly our best one. It's going to be tough because it might not get better than talking about this team.
This is under the radar, the most intriguing team of all time.
Yeah, just one of the greatest stories ever in baseball. And yeah, we'll have that episode ready for you on Friday. You can, if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you can watch the videos with us on YouTube. Go and subscribe at STBNL with Chris Gianta and Daniel Curran. And, if you're on YouTube just finding out about Spotify, as of this date, as of this recording, we are on Spotify. And we're not on Apple Podcasts yet. They take a little bit to approve, but that should be getting going in like the next month.
Yes.
Follow me on Twitter at Chris_Gianta. Follow Daniel on Twitter at Daniel_Curran. And we hope to be seeing you. Also, next episode, we're going to be picking our team player and team for the next week. So make sure to check that episode out. More importantly, we're going to be talking about the 1995 Mariners. So we hope to be seeing you on the other side of this episode. Part 2.
You're not going to want to miss this.
Part 2 of episode 38 of the show to be named later. The 1995 Seattle Mariners saving baseball in Seattle. See you on Friday.